Before I start taking you into the world of Windows Phone development, specifically Windows Phone 8, it's important for us to have a good grasp as to the different pieces or the different components or aspects that we're going to be dealing with throughout this course on Windows Phone development. So one of the very important resources for us to kind of keep in the back of our mind and in our bookmarks is dev.windows.com, and this is the Windows Dev Center, which is going to allow you to see a lot of very cool resources on how to do some very cool Windows Phone development and Windows development. It's just a very good revamped section of the Windows site that's going to give you a lot of information on how to get started, designing apps, developing apps, and ultimately publishing the apps to the store to actually be downloaded by end users to their devices, as well as a very good community of support for any sort of questions or information you might be looking for. So definitely take a look at dev.windows.com, as it's going to be a very important, very good resource for you to have in your tool belt. Now, when we're talking about building Windows Phone applications, regardless if you're talking about Windows 7 or Windows 8, we're really going to be having to deal with a couple different components that are going to make up our application. The first important one for you to understand is XAML, X-A-M-L, pronounced XAML. Now, this is a markup language that's basically mirrored against XML that's going to provide us a way to describe our UI without actually having to get in and write any code in C# to actually do it. So XAML is a very nice, very cool abstraction that allows us to further separate our UI-specific code from our actual functionality. So what we're going to be doing throughout this course to demonstrate a lot of aspects of Windows Phone development is creating some sort of UI component using XAML, described in XAML, and then adding functionality to it via C# code in some sort of mechanism behind the scenes. Now, if you've ever done any sort of work with WPF or maybe even things like WinForms or things of that nature, you may say, oh yeah, I just use a code behind file and I wire up event handlers. Well, yes, you can do that, but it's generally speaking within the later stages or these new ways of creating Windows applications, whether it be for actual Windows or for Windows Phone, that's kind of like a no-no. You don't want to be able to intermingle that C# code and that XAML, although you can do it, but the more accepted practice today is to use a new pattern, and that is called the model view model pattern, as you can see described here. Now, all these links that I'm showing you are available off of the Windows Dev Center, and I'll put links to all of them underneath this video, but it's just important for me to point these things out to you now so you have at least a high-level understanding as to where it is we're going. Now, this whole concept behind model view model is that we have our data classes, we have our models that's ultimately going to contain the data that we want to put onto the screen or present to the user in some form or another. Then we have our actual view, which in our case is going to be specified by our XAML pages, where we're going to create these pages, these UI aspects, and all of these components on the UI or the screens with that XAML. Then ultimately we have this man in the middle, this view model. Now, the view model is going to be the conduit in between which the model and the view will ultimately communicate, although it will be indirectly. So you may think, oh, this sounds kind of like the MVC pattern, where this model view is really just kind of like a controller, and you could kind of think of it that way, but the way that this becomes very specialized is that this allows for us to create this concept of data binding, which is a key aspect to understand when you're doing MVVM as well as XAML applications, and being able to do this very cool either one-way or two-way data binding that's ultimately going to allow the views to be updated with the model data in real time when things change, which is a very cool concept and actually very simple to implement using these things together. So we're going to get into that as we go throughout this course. We're also going to be working with a few controls as examples, so you'll be able to see all the different types of things you can use within your Windows Phone application. We'll be looking at navigation controls and layout controls, as well as all your basic buttons and lists and things of that nature, so you can start to work with and see how those different components play in the Windows Phone 8 world. And then ultimately, we're going to touch on some of the cool features of Windows 8. And some of these are also available in Windows 7 as well, if that's what you're following along with. Things like launchers and choosers and tiles and notifications and ways for you to not only use UI elements within your application, but also tie into some of the very cool features of the Windows Phone platform and actually be able to integrate with them and really give your end user a very rich experience with your app, and so that it kind of flows nicely with what they're expecting to see with a new age Windows Phone 8 application. So that's kind of the high level overview of all the different aspects we're going to be covering. We're going to talk about XAML, we're going to talk about the MVVM pattern, we're going to look at some very cool controls, and ultimately integrate with the Windows 8 platform. So I hope you're ready to go. Let's get started in this Windows Phone 8 adventure.